It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the FinSide. It ain't the left side.
Thank you, Solo D. Welcome to another episode of On the FinSide here with Kat and Paul. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. Well, not an easy one here today either. The Dolphins don't lose by 7 touchdowns, but they did lose by 6 touchdowns to the New England Patriots by the score of 43-0 at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami. Was not an easy one. As far as I'm concerned, Paul, 2 down, 14 to go as the Dolphins continue what looks to be a tank for the 2019 NFL season. They did play a little bit better. I mean, at the end of the third quarter, the Dolphins were actually only down 2 touchdowns. So that's something.
Yeah, it certainly is something. Fitzpatrick basically looked at the 2 touchdowns and said, "Hold my beer," and went out and made it a 4-touchdown lead. But we'll get into that as we go through our grades.
Yep, he certainly did. And let's go to some news here after the game and during the week. We talked a lot about Minkah Fitzpatrick, who had a pretty good game in that rover position that he seemingly doesn't want to play. According to a report by Armando Salguero, the Dolphins are talking about a first-round pick with a couple of different teams. A few teams that are being talked about are the Kansas City Chiefs, the Dallas Cowboys, some of those teams in playoff contention, about a first-round draft pick. So, Paul, my question to you is if you trade him to the Dallas Cowboys or the Kansas City Chiefs, you're probably trading him to a playoff team, meaning that the Dolphins' return would be somewhere between 20 and 32 in the NFL draft. It would give them 3 first-rounders, 2 second-rounders, and 2 third-rounders. So would you be okay with that trade, or would you prefer the Dolphins keep Minkah Fitzpatrick?
Honestly, knowing that there's 3 teams in the discussions around a first-round pick, I'd be willing to part with him for a first. I don't want to part with him for a second, a third, and Taco. To me, it just feels like eventually he might buy in on this move piece as he grows into the role. I saw some signs of him growing into it today, and hopefully Miami's able to retain Minkah and he gets this shit out of his head, because at the end of the day, he got drafted by them. If he doesn't want to be here in 4 years, great, good for you. But as it stands right now, you're under contract, play ball. You need to do what was told. And I think if he buys into what he's doing, he could legitimately be an all-pro as that switch piece once he grows into that role in a year or 2.
Yeah, like I said the other day, I think this is more about Minkah playing for a team that is tanking, not necessarily him being moved around. But the word is he doesn't like his role with the team. I don't know how much I honestly believe that, but we'll see what happens. You know, if it's a first-round pick, I still would not do it. I would like to see kind of a bidding war and maybe the Dolphins getting a first and a third if, you know, we can't turn this around and make it work with Minkah Fitzpatrick. But yeah, I put out a poll on Twitter, and you bring up Taco Charlton. My question was, if the Dolphins were offered a second-round pick in 2020, a third-round pick in 2021, and defensive end Taco Charlton, who's a player that's been talked about for the Dallas Cowboys, could fit pretty well in this 3-4 defense as kind of that pass rush piece, but hasn't played very well. 69% of Dolphins fans who responded to the poll said that they would not take that trade. Would you take it?
No. Sorry, I answered your question ahead of your question on that one, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. It's got to be a first rounder at least, and I still wouldn't do a first rounder. I'd prefer first, third, or a first round pick in either a third or a fourth. Also, Kenyon Drake was talked about too, and I don't know how accurate this is, but at this point, if Kenyon Drake does not factor into the Dolphins' plans, maybe he does end up going for a mid rounder.
It's possible. I think Kenyon wants to be here. Reports are that he does want to be in Miami, and Miami's got the cap space next year to extend Kenyon if they are able to utilize him to his strengths, which he can be a pretty lethal piece if used appropriately. And Miami's got north of 100 million for cap space next year. So,
Yep.
I mean, it shouldn't be hard to get an extension in place and still be able to do, well, anything that they want to do with the cap space that they've got.
Yeah, and even a trade wouldn't make a lot of sense either, because if the Dolphins and the compensatory formula works out for them next year, if you lose Drake, maybe you get even a fourth or a fifth round pick back. But then again, the Dolphins should be pretty active in free agency with all the money they have. So, I would understand too. Yeah, I could go either way. If they're going to be active in free agency, which I intend for them to be, if Drake doesn't figure into the plans, maybe you do unload him for a fourth round pick or something like that. But I'm still frustrated that he is not more prominently figured throughout the game, and we'll get to that a little bit later when we go to our position by position grades. So, taking a look at this here, Paul, I mean, the Dolphins did, like I said, they hung around until the end of the third quarter. It was a 16-0 game, so technically 2 scores, and it didn't feel like it was that big of a blowout throughout the game. I mean, heck, at the 2-minute warning in the first half, the Miami Dolphins were only down by 7 points to the Patriots, and then Antonio Brown has a blatant offensive pass interference call against Jamal Wiltz. It's not called. Catches a touchdown, and it's 13-0 after the missed extra point. But offensively, man, oh man, halfway through the third quarter, the Dolphins had 49 total yards on offense.
Yeah, and they were negative yardage for the second half, I believe, at that point. I think they were at negative 3 yards for the half. So between the two, that's not good enough. And you look at, as the game went on, Josh Rosen finally came in. He hit a ball right off Preston Williams' hands down in the red zone. He hit a ball off Jakeem Grant's hands, which would have been blatantly an obvious touchdown. And, it just looked like night and day when Josh Rosen came in over Ryan Fitzpatrick. But again, that's the same thing we saw in the preseason. It's the same thing a lot of Dolphins fans saw. They're still not going to start him most likely next week, which would be an unfortunate thing, because I want to see the kid play. I want to see what we've got. I want to see if Miami needs to utilize those 2 or 3 draft picks next year for a quarterback or not.
Well, we've wanted to see him play starting game 1, and what would you have had to lose if you did? And I think it would have given Dolphins fans something to watch this year, even behind a bad offensive line. And to go back to what you were saying, with 8 minutes left in the game, we're just looking for something to hang our hat on. Dolphins are down 37-0. Josh Rosen drops a dime to Jakeem Grant. He loses it in the sun, dropped 55-yard touchdown. 2 plays later, Preston Williams. He drops a dime to Preston Williams for a walk-in touchdown. Ball goes right off his hands. I mean, we could be talking about Preston Williams with 5 catches for 110-plus yards and a touchdown and something to hang our hat on. Did not come to that. So let's go to the grades, Paul. Quarterback, we've talked about this. I think Fitzpatrick absolutely needs to be benched in favor of Josh Rosen. When Rosen came in, he had 1 interception. I think it was on the last play of the game on a tip ball. He does get some balls tipped, but yeah, I mean, the ball just comes out of his hands so cleanly, and we have to see what's going to happen with Josh Rosen for the rest of the year. But when you take a look at the Dolphins quarterback rating here on the season, 32.4 between Josh Rosen and Ryan Fitzpatrick in 2 games. Clearly not good enough. Because Rosen, I thought, looked somewhat decent when he came in at the end of the game, I'm going to give them a D.
I'm going to go with an F here. It's, Fitzpatrick was getting beat up, but he only made it worse by putting the Dolphins in a position where the Patriots didn't have to worry about the run any longer with his back-to-back interceptions for touchdown. I mean, Jesus, that was so horrific. When your quarterback gives up 14 points, I don't care if one of them was on a ball that probably should have been caught. Your quarterback gives up 14 points in a stretch of minutes. I can't give the team anything but an F for the quarterback position.
I was at that same spot last week with special teams, and I'm with you. Anytime you you have that situation where you're putting points on the board for the other team. I mean, let's even take it a step further. On offense, the Dolphins have the opposing defense in 2 games has scored 14 points, and the Dolphins on offense have scored 10 points. So that alone should be a failing grade. I'm with you on that. So at running back, a little bit better this week, 13 carries for 40 yards. Last week it was 10 carries for 12 yards out of the running backs. Kenyon Drake a little bit more involved this week. Kalen Ballage continues to struggle. How do you grade the running back spot?
I'd go with a C minus here. I like the way a couple of the backs are catching the ball out of the backfield, and I'm not going to point at Kalen Ballage with that because there was a very easy screen pass his way that he ducked to avoid the ball and then looked behind him like he thought the ball was to somebody else. I mean, that was just ugly. And I think I just talked myself down to a D plus for the running back position. I mean, not a lot to love, but they also weren't in a position to be utilized heavily outside of the passing game.
I'm going to go with a D, and a big reason is Kalen Ballage. I mean, 4 carries for 6 yards, and man, oh man, does he look bad in the passing game. And it's not specifically even blocking. He's not a great blocker either, but that pick 6 was not on Ryan Fitzpatrick. That was 100% on Kalen Ballage because the ball went right into his hands. He bobbled it and basically handed the ball off to Jamie Collins. And he also had a drop pass on the first drive of the game that if he breaks a tackle, maybe we're talking about a first down. So to me, Kalen Ballage, it's hard to watch him right now. And I hope the Dolphins can get Mark Walton on the field a little bit sooner. Patrick Laird was active for this game too, I believe. I hope they get him on the field too, but I have no faith right now in Kalen Ballage. At wide receiver and tight end, we've talked about them, and man, oh man, what a rough game. I mean, the stat sheet says 4 catches for 64 yards for Preston Williams, but dropped 2 more passes, and one of them at least could have padded the stat sheet at the end of the game. I think the kid still has talent, but you got to come down with that pass. And Devontae Parker as well. It's 8 minutes left in the second quarter, and Ryan Fitzpatrick's drops back and airs the ball out, puts it right where it needs to be for Devontae Parker. It would have been a very good catch against J.C. Jackson with 8 minutes left in the second quarter. But if he comes down with it, the Dolphins are in the red zone, in the middle of the second quarter, and they did not make that happen. Jakeem Grant just continues a nightmare of a season. I mean, at halftime, he had -7 rushing and receiving yards on the year. He finished the game with 3 catches for 22 yards. But the big thing with him is that he took a punt return that was very ill-advised, and then in addition to that, drops a 55-yarder with just minutes left. Could have at least padded the stat sheet. So it was all bad all around at wide receiver and tight end. Nick O'Leary missed a terrible block at the beginning of the game on a Jakeem Grant end around. I've got to give them an F.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, I'm not saying that they would have won the game, but at least they would have preserved Miami from getting shut out in this one. They had multiple opportunities and failed to capitalize on most of those opportunities. I can't wait to see Albert Wilson get back out there.
Offensive line, I'm going to throw it back to you.
I'm going to go because they did have a good first half. Not great, but they actually showed some semblance of being an offensive line for the first time in a while. I'm going to give the offensive line a C minus here. I mean, they didn't open up huge running lanes, but at the same time, Miami was in position where they were mostly throwing the ball. And Fitzpatrick got batted around a little bit in the second half. But at the end of the day, the offensive line did much better than we expected in this one. So I'll give them a C minus.
I would have graded them at a B minus in the first half, and in the second half, it would have been an F minus. So I'm going to put it somewhere in the middle there at a D plus. I thought it brought down the offensive, the entire offense to a level where they really couldn't even compete in that second half, and maybe they wouldn't have anyway, but this is a offensive line that should at least keep the quarterback clean against the Patriots, who don't pride themselves really on pass rush from the defensive line, which they got. Danny Isidora is brutal at right guard. And Jesse Davis, even though he is a very good player, it is a disservice to him to have him at left tackle. He got absolutely smoked on at least 3 occasions on third down. Very big plays, too. So, I'm hoping Jesse Davis kicks back inside next year. Let's move on to the defensive side of the ball, because there actually were some bright spots here. Along the front seven, when you take a look at the run defense, first of all, I mean, there's not much of a pass rush. Charles Harris continues to go invisible. I'm hoping he's going to turn it around at some point. It doesn't look like that's happening. But when you take a look at the run defense, if you take out Mark Ingram's 50-yard run, the first play of the season, the Dolphins on run defense are averaging about 3.9 yards a carry. So at least there's some progress there. We're just looking for things to hang our hat on. So, what's impressing you about this front seven? How do you grade how they did in this game?
There were moments in this one where John Jenkins looked absolutely dominant, and that was a pleasant thing to see. I thought Tank did a good job doing a little bit of pass rush, even though he only got to that. I don't even think he got credit for a half sack when Jenkins hit Brady with his own lineman. But, Tank was right there. There were 1 or 2 plays with Charles Harris where I thought he did well. They just schemed well to stop. And I mean, Christian Wilkins had that forced fumble, and I thought had a decent, solid game, as did Davin Godchow. So there were some bright spots. I mean, if we're incorporating pass rush with the defensive line here, Vince Beagle getting his first career sack was a big fun thing to see. But I don't have a problem with the front seven on defense. There's really just 2 players that I'm underwhelmed by, and they're not in the front seven.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I know who they are too. Front seven, I didn't have a huge problem. They don't have a pass rusher. It's about time that we, just start accepting that. But going back to John Jenkins, I mean, John Jenkins flat out walked back Shaq Mason back to the quarterback at least 3 times in this game. And Shaq Mason is a Pro Bowl player with the Patriots, making about $9 or $10 million a year. So that's a bright spot. Davin Godchow, I think, just flat out does his job. And Christian Wilkins, had the forced fumble. He doesn't keep the best containment, especially with gap assignments at this point. Hopefully that comes into play a lot more. But Vince Beagle to me was the star of this game. I mean, I counted at least 4 times that he made legitimate pass rush moves, and he came away with a sack too. He's somebody that we're going to have to keep an eye on moving forward. So I didn't have a huge problem with what they did here. So I'm going to give them a B minus.
I mean, I'm completely there with you on that. Did I give my grade? I know I talked about it a lot. I wasn't sure if I gave my grade. Okay.
No.
I'm going to give the front seven a B. I mean, they helped hold a pretty potent Patriots offense to less scores than we saw on the scoreboard here, and really, the pass rush was good. I thought at times it was as good as it could be anyway. And like you said with the run defense, they're allowing 3.9 yards per carry outside of that one run if you take it away. So I didn't have a problem with the front seven here.
Yeah, and hopefully we can get some pass rushers here along the way too. And I will bang the table on this in the offseason if he's not re-signed by the Chiefs. Chris Jones. If the Dolphins can get him on their defensive line with Wilkins and with Godchow and maybe with the John Jenkins coming back, I think that's going to make a big difference for an impact player. Defensive backs, I think we know who to point the finger at here. I mean, we've talked about Minka. Xavier Howard, again, had a fantastic game. He had 1 penalty, but, you're going to have some penalties, and you're going to have a pass caught off you here and there. I thought Bobby McCain had a good bounce back game. Rashad Jones was not available in this contest, and Minka, played in the box. He was all over the field. I thought he showed a lot of passion. Maybe he was just showing that as trade bait here for this upcoming week, but that they did well, and we know who the good players are. But Eric Rowe and Jamal Wiltz, man, oh man, Paul, these guys are tough to watch, and it really gets exposed when you go up against Antonio Brown and up against Jamal Wiltz. I hope the Dolphins can get Ken Webster on the field a little bit more. This is a player that was a projected first or second round pick just a year ago today, but had a terrible knee injury at Ole Miss. But he really does look the part. Keep an eye on him. But Tom Brady goes 20 for 28, 254 yards, 2 touchdowns for the season. Lamar Jackson and Tom Brady have a quarterback rating over 150. So this grade is definitely brought down a lot by Eric Rowe and Jamal Wiltz. And that grade here is going to be, let's go with a C-.
I'm going to go with a C+ here, and a lot of it has to do with any player not named Wiltz or Rowe. I mean, those two were just abysmal. They extended drives, they allowed touchdowns, and yeah, there were a couple of pick plays. Wiltz maybe allowed that touchdown to Antonio Brown on a pretty obvious pass interference. But again, what I see out of those two is just not good enough. Xavier Howard is just freaking lights out. I mean, if he had a penalty, but whatever. You're going to get those throughout the season if you're playing hard. You're going to occasionally get a few, as you pointed out. And Bobby McCain, like you said, great bounce back game. And Minka did recover that fumble that after Christian Wilkins forced it, which was great to see. And I thought he did a little bit better job responding, whether it's, proving his worth for trade or what have you. I thought he did a little better job responding to being that move piece and the way they game planned with him this week.
Let's wrap it up here with special teams before we get to the good and the bad players of the game. Special team, not a lot to talk about because Jason Sanders did not attempt an extra point. Matt Hawk, I tell you what, if he could punt on a short field as well as he does on a long field, then I think he'd be one of the best punters in the league. But I can't tell you how many times this year and last year that the Dolphins are punting from the 30 or 40-yard line, and Matt Hawk ends up kicking it. The Dolphins end up with 30 or 35 net yards on the play. Not good enough. I hope the Dolphins get a different punter next year unless Matt Hawk turns it around, because he does have the talent to do it too. On kick return, at least Jakeem Grant returned the ball to the 35-yard line toward the end of the game. Not a whole lot else to report on, so I'm just going to go ahead and give them a C+.
I'll give them a B. I mean, there was nothing spectacular short of what you've already mentioned. I did find it absolutely humorous that they iced an extra point successfully, which you don't see very often in the NFL. But, it was. I'm glad we're not grading the Patriots special teams, because that would be a very obvious F. So one area that Miami won the battle.
If we give them credit here for Gostkowski's missed kicks, and that is humorous about the iced extra point, then it brings up the grade substantially. I'll stick with my C+, but yeah, Gostkowski had a pretty rough game. He had missed 2 extra points, and he also missed a 47-yard field goal. So yeah, it's special teams has definitely not been the problem with this team this year. Danny Crossman's done a pretty good job so far, so we'll hope that he continues that as we go along. Paul, who is your player of the game, and who is your Coke Bus player of the game?
I'm going to give Xavier Howard player of the game. I thought he did a very good job against a pretty potent Patriots passing attack in really just shutting down, whoever got thrown at him, whether it was Josh Gordon or really anybody else along that Patriots front, because, God, they've got a good wide receiving core. And, again, he continues to prove that you want to throw at those weak players on the other side of the field. So I'll give it to Xavier Howard. And for Coke Bus, Eric Rowe. I'm going to give it to Eric Rowe because, Wiltz did allow that touchdown off of what should have been a pass interference. So we'll share the load this week and throw Rowe up on that Coke Bus.
For my player of the game, I'm going to go with a species that's right next to me, who's actually our third co-host here, who's a beagle himself, Jackson. I'm going to give the player of the game to Vince Beagle. I think this is a player to really keep an eye on throughout the year. I mean, he had a sack of Tom Brady, and I thought it very easily could have been 2 or 3. If we're looking for that type of edge rusher that is going to basically scheme their way to the quarterback, I think this guy could be that person. My Cook Bus player of the game is Kalen Ballage. This is somebody who needs to flat out step it up. 4 carries for 6 yards and drops 2 easy passes in the passing game. I mean, just not good enough right now. I'm really hoping that Brian Flores looks at the game tape and sees that Mark Walton is the better running back at this point. He just seems to get it a lot more. They're about the same age. I would rather put him out there right now. So that will do it for our breakdown of the Miami Dolphins 43-0 loss to the New England Patriots. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And if it's not on the right side and it's not on the left side, it is on the fin side. So, Ladie, take us home.
It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the fin side.